Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this fireside chat on the evolution of carbon capture, utilization, and storage. My name is Alex Krauka. I am a Seattle-based consultant for the U.S. Energy Association. For those of you who aren't familiar with USEA, USEA is a nonprofit, apolitical educational association that represents the full gamut of the energy industry. So everything from renewables to fossils to the nuclear and everything in between. USEA has projects on literally every continent except for Australia and Antarctica, much of which is focused, or many of the projects are focused on capacity building and technical assistance. Many of them done in cooperation with the U.S. Agency for International Development, Department of State, and then the program that brings us here today is a cooperative agreement that we have with the U.S. Department of Energy's Office of Fossil Energy and Carbon Management. So that cooperative agreement is called the Consensus Program, a program which seeks to educate the public, policymakers, industry, and other stakeholders to build a consensus on the benefits of and requirements for carbon capture, use and storage, or utilization and sequestration, if you will, as well as other carbon management technologies. So things such as carbon dioxide removal, blue hydrogen development, methane emissions mitigation, sustainable and domestic development of rare earths and critical minerals. Much of what falls under FECM's umbrella we seek to support. We do this through a variety of activities, such as briefings and webinars like the one that we're hosting today. We have a series of workshops that we put on throughout the year. We have white papers and reports that we work with our subcontractors, such as Battelle, to produce and help inform and educate the public. And then we have news clips that we try to put out on a monthly basis to help keep our stakeholders informed of industry happening. So just a quick note on logistics. This webinar is being recorded. We will post it on the event page in the coming days, as well as on YouTube. We're probably going to hold off on Q&A until after the presentations, unless we see some really compelling questions come in that really need to be answered right away. If you have any questions or comments, please use the Q&A box at the bottom of the Zoom window for those questions and comments. So that's all I had on a logistics note. I'm really excited to have this event today discussing the evolution of CCUS. There's certainly a segment of the population that's under the impression that CCUS is a new unproven technology. I think we'll find out that there's a long and deep history to CCUS, and I'm not sure we meet our decarbonization goals without it. So I think it's incredibly important that we're having this talk today. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Mike Moore to kind of introduce Ashleigh and how this fireside chat came about. So Mike, the floor is yours.
Alex, thank you very much, and Ashleigh, you too, for taking the time to be here today. I've had the great honor to be able to call Ashleigh a friend and a fellow traveler in the world of CCS. We've known each other I'd say close to 20 years actually, in this space, and so we've seen a lot as this evolved, as we evolved with it as well. The companies we've been part of, the evolution of policy, public opinion, global opinion. And it's an ever evolving space, but it's certainly gotten a lot more uptake now than we've ever seen before. And just for those who don't know, Ashleigh is a VP at Carbon America for commercial development and policy, and she's got some pretty cool ideas that have come out of all this experience and exposure we've had. The other thing too, and it's a little bit different part of this equation, is that Ashleigh and I both independently have experienced a lot these near-death experience. And what happens when you go through something like that without spending a lot of time on it is that how you see the world is a lot different than before the event. Things that matter, you really dedicate time to. Things that don't, or that you don't believe in, you really don't spend a lot of time on it. we don't have the luxury of time that we may have thought we had before. And we know that's an infinite moment that we have. And so we use it to the best of our ability. So that kind of makes us a bit of kindred spirits in a space that we both believe very much in. And with that, I'm going to do this. I'm going to turn it over to you, Ashleigh, and you can tell a little about Carbon America yourself and how things look from your side, and we'll start getting into it after that.
Thank you so much, Mike and Alex and everyone for having me here today. I really appreciate this opportunity. And as Mike said, we really are kindred spirits in this space. So by way of kind of background, I've been dedicated to carbon management for 22 years now. Initially working on it in undergrad and then working with Howard Herzog at MIT in the first wave of CCS in the 2000s, was recruited to ConocoPhillips to develop CCS projects, worked with them developing CCS projects, and then moved to BP in 2017 to build out their CCS portfolio and strategy, and then joined Carbon America about 3 years ago because we're exclusively dedicated to the mission of CCS. And so there are two primary things that we do here at Carbon America. One part is a cryogenic capture technology. So we took basically expertise in thermal fluids and grid scale energy storage through thermal energy storage, applied that heat thermal fluid technology and expertise to cryogenic carbon capture. And so it's beautiful. We essentially cool down the flue gas until the CO2 deposits as dry ice. One of the great benefits of that is that all of the other stuff comes out of the flue gas as well. So it takes care of the SOx, NOx, particulates, mercury as an integral part of the process. And we've done that without solvents, without chemicals, without refrigerants, without even water as a feedstock. So it's a really clean environmental technology in terms of maximum environmental benefit and minimum environmental impact of the technology itself. But at one point, we were a capture technology looking for deployment partners, didn't like the options and decided to grow our own. And that's why we've got full technology agnostic project development as well. So we offer up to 100% of a carbon capture and sequestration project. We'll bring the capture, the transport, and the sequestration, or just the pieces that are necessary to make the project go. And we cover every phase of that project lifecycle, from early pre-feasibility through design, build, finance, take care of all of the tax equity financing, 45Q, own and operate those projects, and hold long-term liability in perpetuity for our projects. And with that, we've built quite a landscape of projects here for Carbon America. We've got Colorado and Nebraska's first commercial CCS projects, with Sterling and Yuma ethanol here in Colorado and Bridgeport ethanol up in Nebraska. We've got Class 6 permits submitted for both of those projects already. We've planted a big flag here in Southern Colorado to build out a really comprehensive CCS ecosystem. We've got a sequestration grant, as well as a DAC hub feasibility study and a large-scale pilot of our capture technology, all to build out a really comprehensive ecosystem to give this community a new era in an industrial dawn. We're also pretty active in the policy and advocacy space. We've been working across a number of efforts at state and federal levels. I've been put on one of the White House task forces for CCS permitting. And we've been pushing a number of policies that would also unlock additional geographic regions of the United States for sequestration through things like expanding aquifer exemptions to Class 6 and giving them parity to that process with the rest of the classes. We've also submitted a carbon safe just last week for another big, beautiful carbon CCS project, where again, we've got it really community centric, and we've got support from the senators all the way down to the county commissioners, and we're essentially decarbonizing the economic engines of that community. We've also got a DAC hub feasibility study in the panhandle of Florida. And our capture technology that is still in development is currently in commissioning at the National Carbon Capture Center in Alabama, and that will get us to a technology readiness level of 6. So as you can see, we've built a pretty wide landscape of projects across the United States, and we're really looking for these projects where we can build that community support and really make our projects very community-centric is what we're looking for here.
You guys have covered a lot of ground in those 3 years you've been there, and it's fascinating the variety of projects that you have and the areas that they encompass. So as we talk about what's at this moment where we are today, when we both got into this over 20 years ago, what did it look like then? It was a lot different landscape.
It really was. It is so true, Mike. And a lot of people, right, are, as Alex said, think that CCS is this new unproven thing. And I should say that I actually got into this as a skeptic. As a little Girl Scout tree hugger, the idea of putting CO2 in the ground made me nervous. So I actually got into this to convince myself about whether or not it was a valid technology. And I learned about that history of CO2 injection going back to the 70s. And it is for the purpose of enhanced oil recovery. But we've got decades worth of experience operating CO2 injection wells, operating CO2 pipelines, and understanding how that CO2 interacts in the subsurface. So there really is a wealth of understanding of kind of how that CO2 can behave in the subsurface. But that first wave of CCS was really kicked off in those first considerations of climate change, when people were starting to really start talking about global warming, as it still was at the time. And people started thinking about our emissions projections are projected to continue going up. We need them to go down. What are the different tools and technologies and strategies I can use to meet those emissions reductions? And they've always identified carbon capture and sequestration as an integral part of the solution. Certainly not a silver bullet, but definitely the lowest cost decarbonization solution for many scenarios. It's anticipated that to meet the same kind of global climate goals without CCS might cost the world twice as much. So it really is a key part of the lowest cost decarbonization solutions. So all of that effort was really around kind of what's the role of CCS and how can it help fight climate change? And a lot of that was really focused at the time on clean coal. Back in those days, right, the grid was much more carbon intensive, much more coal dominated. It was before we had all this massive penetration of renewables. And so we were kind of also right before the financial collapse, before the housing crisis, the economies were great, right? So it was really easy to finance, $2 billion projects, but the energy penalty of CCS was really a critical thing. And we kind of jumped from A to Z. And by proposing projects like FutureGen, these be all end all kind of next generation power plants. And so that really kind of got a lot of people moving, and cap and trade was supposed to happen. So a lot of organizations started moving to develop these CCS projects when cap and trade was going to happen. However, then we did have the financial collapse, right? And the economy started getting real shaky. The American Reinvestment and Recovery Act, essentially that generation's Inflation Reduction Act, pumped a bunch of capital grants into CCS projects, including the project that I was working on that should be storing 5 million tons a year outside of Houston. So we pumped a lot of funds into those projects, but DOE grants are phenomenal to get a lot of work done, but you still can't get a project financed on a Department of Energy grant. So when cap and trade died in Congress, essentially all of the economic drivers for CCS just disappeared. And so the entire CCS world just really collapsed. We went from an era of being kind of science driven of what is the role of CCS to government driven of government trying to get these projects built, pumping money into the grants. And then it all just collapsed into what was economic, which basically meant a little bit of gas processing projects like Petronova. So we've been at these inflection points before. And, before we had the bipartisan infrastructure law, we really didn't know exactly what's going to happen with CCS. It still has this potential. Is it going to take off again? And we saw what happened, right? When the tax credit was raised from $35 to $50 a ton, and that was then stacked on top of the California low carbon fuel standard and them establishing the carbon capture and sequestration protocol. So all of a sudden, we suddenly had line of sight to the economic drivers for CCS again. And so, however, we've got some of those economic drivers there, enough incentives to get some little bit of liftoff. However, I would say that we're now in an era of society-driven CCS. where how much carbon capture and sequestration we get to do in this United States hinges not entirely on the economics, not entirely on the technology, but it hinges entirely on making sure that we get our communities and our stakeholders up to speed and embracing this technology as a viable, safe part of the climate solution.
We certainly are at that inflection point. As with that last round of the improvement in the IRA, through the IRA, the 45Q tax credit, and there's still more guidance coming out in some of the nuances of the credit itself. We're starting to begin we're getting public announcements of projects that have done transactions wrapped around the tax credit itself now. So the funds they're finding a way to get the funds to flow. The projects are beginning to will be breaking ground, and the numbers will start moving up. And there's a lot that past experiences, you'll always have some high profile entities that will be in the space from a public standpoint, but it's what's out there that's not public. There are a lot of things going on that haven't really been announced yet, but they're out there. You can hear the rumblings. People that you work with are busy and very quiet. So that usually tells you something is happening. And so it's kind of like, I'd say it's the calm before the storm. Now, there was just an announcement last week where a company called Capture Point was able to do a trade-off with the 45Qs and captured CO2 that's being stored. And we're going to see and hear a lot more of those. These are people that have been around this space for quite a while, that have worked with all the nuances of making these dots connect. But it won't take long for the folks that maybe aren't day-to-day familiar with where we're at, that see the opportunity and begin jumping in. There's been a complete change in attitude on land value and rights in a lot of these states. The EPA has got a Class 6 permit. It's been designed and delivered, and now the states that want to do it are requesting, and 3 states have their primacy to issue these permits. That in turn allows things to begin to develop and go forward. There's a lot more faces in our space than we've ever seen before. There's a lot of experts in a lot of other areas that are now becoming our new experts in CCS. And so it's very dynamic. A lot of momentum. Public acceptance is going to be a crucial part of it. There's vehicles for the public to participate that we've not had in the past. And, whether it's a pipeline or subsurface rights or geographical locations to propose projects, there's a public out there that you really didn't see as much traditionally as we do now. Woe is those who don't do their homework in that space, trying to conduct this maybe in business as usual 10 years ago. It's changed. I won't point to any examples, but anybody out in this space know of a few firms that have had to rethink their strategies to work through this space when you get to the public part of it, like you mentioned. But inflection point, by all means. But the other thing that's happened, when we got into this, it was all about electricity generation, nothing else. Everything else was so far expensive, off the charts. We never spent any time with it. There were a few people that identified other market sectors that would be in play, but not when the tax credit where it was at, where the policy was unclear, public sentiment was unclear. So we left that alone. Today, every aspect of industrial production of anything is being looked at for its CO2 emissions. And some of them, there's some pretty nifty solutions that are coming to the table now. The other one is the production of hydrogen. I'm a firm believer of all the above. Don't pick one single technology to be your savior. And so we have a lot of hydrogen can come from electrolysis. A lot of hydrogen can come from fossil fuels and decarbonize them, like with the gas and the hydrogen. Well, that's going to be that's CCS, CCUS, even if you're going to go down a utilization route. And on that last piece, on the utilization, there's a huge run of activity on using the CO2 as a valuable commodity that does not ever re-enter the atmosphere as CO2 again. So you spend the money to remove it. Let's take it to the next step and turn it into something valuable rather than call it a waste product. And that's gotten a lot of attention. I mean, a lot of attention. There's a lot of money moving forward in that space. So if I need CO2, I got to ask the CCS guys to get it to me. And if the CCS guys are looking at ways to justify building out their projects, they need any kind of revenue stream they can put together to build that project. So suddenly you got tugs coming from all kinds of directions. The stakeholder depth is a lot deeper. Now we have wide swatches of industry and all of its inherent components that are now part of the CCS play. We didn't have that before.
Right.
And so deeper stakeholders, there's more government engagement. There's a lot more awareness of the capacity to mitigate CO2 greenhouse gas emissions with this process than ever before. And so it's fun's the wrong word because that kind of belittles it a little bit. And I don't want to say it's very energizing. That's kind of like, it's a pun. I don't want it to be a pun, but it is. It's a phenomenal area to be in right now. And as more people do this, as Carbon America is doing, more things are being discovered that might be even more efficient, more effective. New ideas are coming to the table. The public's acceptance is higher. And also the input from the public is having some good impacts as well.
Yeah, I think that's very right. I think we, in the first wave of CCS in the 2000s, right? I did my first research on InfoSeek before Google really existed, right?
Right.
And so even just thinking about the impact of social media these days, right? I think before we had social media, before we were as connected as everyone is, policies like eminent domain for pipelines, I think could be a little bit more under the radar. However, when we've had so much politicization and so much polarization of everything that we're doing, I think we're seeing that polarization of CCS, right? And I think part of that is unfortunately to some extent an output and an impact of how many people are jumping into it with 2 feet right now. And you said, Mike, there's so many new faces and there's so many new entrants to this space, whether they're doing CCS, whether they're doing CO2 to products, and to a large extent, sometimes we're jumping from A to Z again. Some of the projects are kind of be all end all. Those are the projects that will make a whole lot of sense when we've got a lot of community and stakeholder acceptance. But I think as an industry, we need to be very, very thoughtful about the projects that we're rolling out right now and making sure that our projects are really anchored in our communities and that our communities are not a checkbox. I think that's part of the dynamic that we're seeing is that not everyone's taking stakeholder engagement as deeply as people need to, and I think part of that's because of that. And when we developed energy infrastructure previously, we didn't have these dynamics, we didn't have this kind of polarization. So it certainly warrants that we've got to be thinking about our projects differently. We've got to be thinking very thoughtfully about the projects that we can get kicked off to really demonstrate that community support. For example, our project in Nebraska is a 4-mile pipeline. It is not millions of tons of CO2. It is not going to get world headlines, but it's the first project out of the gate in Nebraska. We're essentially working with the landowners who provide feedstock to the ethanol facility, buy grain from the facility, and co-own that facility. We've got such great engagement and support, and by keeping those benefits and externalities local, you can generate that kind of deep support. And I think that, and I'm glad you brought up Capture Point. Capture Point is an example of another organization that really takes community and stakeholder engagement really deeply. Right. And they've done some really phenomenal work to build those relationships and help make sure that people understand the benefits of CCS and work to really develop those benefits and build those benefits with the communities, as opposed to thinking about it as just a checkbox or just this is what I need to fill out to get my funding opportunity.
Right. The back on the community part, if you we're landowners in Kansas, and and there's been a lot of development over the years in Kansas on oil and gas, and in southeastern corner was coal years ago, and galena mines. There's a lot of leftovers from prior, extraction industries rolling through the state. And as long as you can see those things, it kind of reinforces maybe a bias against things of that nature. Nowadays, the permitting requirements and remediation requirements, all these kind of components are a result of that early stakeholder engagement, public engagement that's showing up now in how things get done. People can't just do aggressive resource recovery and then walk away. And then you got the water aspect as well. Water is far more dear than it's ever been, and so there's a lot of steps that have to be taken to make sure that that's not impaired as well. So a firm that's going to come into this space has to make a lot of commitments that they might not have had to do as rigorously 20, even 10 years ago than they do now. But there are firms that are doing that, and they are making the changes to do this correctly. And they're also doing it because the public's a lot more aware of what companies are expected to do. Before, you might have met maybe a little bit of, I won't call it ignorance, but maybe just not as aware of what the responsibilities were. And if, they weren't being watched close, people would do their thing. So we're working through that. So for Carbon America, the components for your different projects, I guess I'm going to ask you, which one's your most favorite?
Oh, goodness. So it's interesting, Mike. So it's funny because in over 2 decades in CCS, I'd never gotten excited about capture technology because they were all kind of incremental improvements on the same, right? And I think in that first wave of CCS, when the grid was so much more coal dominated and capital was really cheap, everybody was really obsessed with the energy penalty of CCS, almost to the extent of CapEx be damned. And that's what all of the energy efficiency and all of the research really went into, was trying to improve the energy efficiency of CCS. I think we've got a very different landscape now, right? The grid is very different. And we've got different dynamics at play where we can much more often bring low cost renewables to help power systems. We've got different dynamics at play. We've got cheaper renewables. We've got different ways of thinking about the technology and rolling it out. And for example, we used to be obsessed with the efficiency and optimize every single project. If we do that with every single project, kind of everything stick built, highly customized, it is going to take us forever to get to our decarbonization goals. So there's a new way of thinking about CCS, that the capture technology does not have to be the most perfect and highly optimized and tuned at every single facility. The most important thing is getting that capture technology churned out. And so we've got a very different capture technology that is modular, essentially made using existing equipment. We're using a lot of compressors, expanders, and turbines proven at existing scale. And all of our real innovation is in a shell and tube heat exchanger. So once we get that proven at the National Carbon Capture Center, it's a number up, not a scale up for us. And so that means that basically we can build our factory and start churning out these capture systems and deploy modules all across the United States. So that's one thing that I have gotten pretty excited about.
Sure.
And importantly, because we're not using chemicals, we're not using water, we're not using solvents, I get pretty excited about that. But it's really these big hub projects, and in particular, the one down here in Southern Colorado was kind of my baby, my brainchild. I saw this as all of the right makings of a good CCS project. But if we just did a CCS project there, we would have missed the really critical opportunity to bring visibility to our efforts to use best practices and establish a model of community developer relations, incorporating principles of consent-based siting, and really doing that two-way feedback and making sure that we get all of that kind of feedback from our landowners before we finalize any of our development plans. And so by really leaning heavily into that kind of community-centric nature of the project and doing that work to make sure that we're establishing it for the furtherance and support of the region's economic and social development goals. That's what gets me really, really excited.
This is pretty fascinating. One of the things that just came to mind when you're talking about the modularity of the process that's going to go down at the NCC when it comes off is we get a lot of questions about, for CCS, about the energy penalty, and there's lots of ways to look at that, of course. And any industry consumes electricity, so if you've got a power gen set, maybe the capture is a separate commercial entity that's licensed to remove the CO2 from this entity's power generation. So he actually will be paying for the electricity that the generator is generating, whether it goes to him or some other industrial user. It's the power gen set is getting paid for his generation. So really, it's not a penalty. But something more fascinating is that if I can be modular, and there's areas where smaller size is going to make a difference in some of these regional applications, I might actually be able to take advantage of the negative pricing on renewables at parts of the day that they don't have a market for it. I become a regional market for what would otherwise be negative price power into a marketplace. The large hub scale projects probably would be able to take advantage of much of that. Excuse me, but a smaller modular system just might be able to. So now, instead of an energy penalty, you become an energy bonus to the suppliers. They're getting paid a better market price and saying having to give it up at a negative number. Now, that's spotty. It's not consistent. These processes typically run 7x24, but it's all kind of ways to kind of put things to rethink things for ways that we've been thinking about them before. The excuse me, I got a in my throat. So the one piece you mentioned as we were coming into it about the cryogenics, that's pretty fascinating.
It is rather interesting, yeah, and it took me by surprise, even with that kind of background in CCS. And it's been pretty cool watching our R&D team get that project kind of developed and thinking about all of the different concepts. So one of the thing I love so much about it is it's got huge benefits in co-pollutant capture and this ability to address the SOx, NOx, particulates, mercury. That is an implicit integrated benefit of our capture technology that otherwise is a challenge for more conventional capture technology, that you'd have to do a separate technology to really clean up and polish that flue gas. And it's interesting because that has limited marketability in the United States, to be honest, right? Because we've got such great pollution control technology here in the United States. However, thinking about all of the unabated coal plants being built across the world, thinking about one integrated system that can take care of all of the other pollutants in addition to the carbon it starts to get pretty exciting. Yeah. Oh. And additionally, it has the benefit of being entirely electric load. And that means that it's much more easy to retrofit, and we don't need to integrate with a steam cycle. We wouldn't need to build separate steam boilers to power the capture system. And so that makes it a much more easy retrofit application as well. But that also means that if you are an industrial facility paying really high electrical rates and you've got a lot of waste heat, I would rather bring you an amine. I will always want to bring the best technology to that emitter and kind of the most optimized solution for that facility.
Certainly, and this is in line with what we're talking about. But somebody had posed the question about, well, this is great. We've got all this money at the front end under 45Q. What happens when that runs out? Do we have a plan B, or will we need a plan B? Has the front end costs of developing and building and the front end operating costs that are always normally very high at the beginning, is that done to the point that later on it was great to have the 45Q, it'd be great to maintain it for additional margins, but maybe these processes have been fine-tuned, market conditions have changed for the outputs, or even what's in demand for it, to allow them to operate without a financial support. My crystal ball is cloudy, of course, and I don't know the answer to that, but it's a good question. And if you talk to a project developer, you really don't build projects that are profitable, that need profitability for 20 years with only knowing you're going to get the first 5 to 10 years of it up front. Actually, it might be less because your startup costs typically run negative against any margin you have. So you have to have something in the back of your mind to compel you to build multi-billion dollar projects, knowing that the life of 45Q has a certain stop date.
Mhm.
So far, I haven't seen anybody that has announced projects that they want to build say that at year 12, we're shutting it down. So
Yeah.
there's something out there in expectation. And so I don't know, any insights on your side?
I think your word is perfect. Expectation.
Yeah.
We don't know what that value stream is going to be 12 years after start of operations, which realistically is for most projects at least 15 years away. And so I think there's full expectation that there will be a comparable or better driver and incentive to keep these projects operational. And I think that it's just a matter of what exactly that's going to look like. And over the years, I mean, for example, we've been advocating for 20 years instead of 12 years for 45Q.
Right.
Didn't get that yet. People, and especially the investment community and the investment banks, are still, everybody's thinking about things from 20-year periods.
Right.
So I think extensions of 45Q, some of the concepts around essentially dropping down 45Q to something that could cover the OPEX.
Right.
Those 12 years, or a separate tax credit to help cover that OPEX. But I also think that we're going to start seeing more and more coming out of the states, especially not knowing exactly how federal policy is going to change and evolve. We've got much greater kind of line of sight and clarity to how some of the state politics and dynamics are going to change, and some of those are going to be a lot slower and aren't going to necessarily follow federal politics. And
Right.
so continuing to work with our state leaders, our state legislatures around and helping them understand and support the projects to get built to begin with, but then understanding the long-term support that's going to be needed to make sure we can stay operational is, I think, going to be a critical thing that we've got to start working on. So it's, I think, an expectation that by the time we get to that point, we will have more clarity on that.
Sure.
I don't necessarily see it hampering too many projects at this point yet, though.
You also have to take into consideration which end of the project you're looking at. So a lot of them will be vertically integrated for the most part. And so you have the capture and the purpose of the capture. You have the cleanup of the gas. You have the pipeline and transmission, and you have the geologic storage piece if you're not going to utilization. And each one of those are actually separate businesses or industries in their own right. And so each one of them have their own way of putting things together that makes sense. You put it all together to create the bigger package, and they're all different when you look at it from that perspective. But something else is a driver. If I'm a resource-rich region like Wyoming or Texas or North Dakota, Wyoming, you're going to look at it from the side of, I have a very valuable resource that the state benefits from if I decarbonize it. If I just try to do like business as usual, I'm as a state, I've lost a big piece of my budget. So that they've all been motivated to find ways to add to that deck of financial tools, regulatory tools, permitting tools to entice businesses to help them decarbonize their resource base. At the other end of it, you've got the entities that are capturing CO2 so that they can keep their industries viable in a decarbonized market space. This European carbon adjustment mechanism is right around the corner. And I think people have taken some time to kind of figure out that if they're part of a supply chain that's delivering into Europe, their individual CO2 footprint goes into figuring whether their customers can deliver products into the EU. So if they can't, because of their footprint, they're going to come back to you, and you're going to have to do things. So you've got just from that part alone, a big new wave of industrial applications for CCS. And so they're motivated because that, or they, well, who else do they sell their items to? And then you have at the tail end of it, if I own land in an area that has very little oil and gas production, but it does have the capacity for CO2 storage, I never thought that'd be worth anything as a landowner. But today, you can actually look at that and say, I have a likely valuable asset that I'd like to monetize. And so you have all these interested parties that add and have their piece of the financial equation in that game that's there before. The resource base for storage, C12 jumped into this 10 years ago. They were right on the mark. They were just a little bit ahead of the curve.
Yeah.
And that's all come back around again, full cycle. I run the program, out in Midland with Steve Melzer, the CO2 EOR carbon management and the CO2 technical workshops out there. And up until the last 2 years, landmen never bothered to show up. There's nothing there for those guys. In the CO2 EOR world, that land's already taken care of under the mineral leases. But all of a sudden, the last couple of years, we have landmen showing up who are the only thing they're doing is securing storage rights on properties. And there's a lot of property to, secure these rights from. So it's a kind of an evolution. So there's a whole new range of stakeholders that benefit as this goes forward. So what does that look like in 20 years? I don't know, but I don't think population is dropping. And I don't think energy demand is dropping. In fact, if anything, we've been told that load is suddenly now starting to take this upward spike in demand. And it's coming from a lot of processes aggregately, but the one that's really sticking out the most is AI. And the power requirement for AI is going off the charts, but it's also something else. It's 7x24 firm power. They're not science experiments that can afford interruptibility. So there's a lot of work on how you blend all the above power sources to supply AI. One of the last pieces of that one is going to be at some point, AI becomes a mission critical service. So the power load that AI demands, they'll get first in front of every other activity out there because they're embedded in so many mission critical services. So now you have this big load, 7x24, firm to a mission critical service. It's not making sure your Netflix works. It's making sure all these other critical services, AI systems work for them. So all these things are going to create a certain amount of tension for solid power generation, industrial resource generation, all these kind of things as we go forward. I got to go off all on these rabbit trails, and we don't have enough time.
But specifically on that point, I would recommend everyone read the Google policy paper that they did last year on 24/7 carbon-free energy. It was like my grad school heart was all aflutter because they did all of this. They did all of this techno-economic analysis, essentially looking at where they project their anticipated data loads and all of these new electrical demand. And they actually had to constrain how much CCS the models were deploying because they thought that the models actually wanted to deploy more CCS than they thought was feasible geologically. But it demonstrates the thinking that they've done around that kind of firm, dispatchable, and have essentially convinced themselves that, for example, decarbonized gas power needs to be an integral part of the solution, that we're not going to be able to meet 24/7 carbon-free energy with purely renewables. Hydrogen isn't going to be sufficient to get it done. And so there are a number of groups that have kind of convinced themselves accidentally of the necessity of this. And that's why we've been really grateful to see the efforts of, for example, the recent Microsoft, Google, and Nucor announcement. We see that as a really viable way to kind of juice this industry and get some things moving, right? It's not dissimilar to how the Frontier Fund, the Frontier essentially aggregated demand for carbon dioxide removal credits, this kind of aggregated demand to demonstrate that demand pull for these decarbonization solutions, I think is going to go a really long way. And again, I think is going to also kind of mitigate against changing political winds as well from a federal perspective.
Yeah, there's a lot there on that. We gosh, I mean, there's so many places we could cover right now.
Mhm.
I want to make sure that we get some of the areas you and I had talked about
Yeah.
before we put this up. So uh, on the modularity part, and actually there's a couple of questions that come up about modularity. How have you mapped out maybe the areas that you most likely expect the modular processes to be uploaded first? Particular industries that are more likely than others?
So I think it's interesting because I think that the some of the best applications, for example, are going to be at the higher concentrations, right? And I think that's true of
Sure.
generally most capture technologies, that higher concentration is going to be more economic. And you know, you also take a look at the net zero commitments of folks like cement companies, right? That have made net zero commitments that might not be American owned. And so I think there's a much bigger kind of driver there. And so I think the modularity is certainly going to help by especially helping people think this is kind of a little bit more bite size. But the other one of the other key critical things that and this is addressing one of the questions in the comments there. One of the things that our counterparties really like about our capture technology is it's turbo machinery. It's not a big chemical process. And so some of our facilities, especially the hard to abate industries that are less comfortable with the idea of chemical kind of capture systems, have really embraced this concept. But I think one of the other key differentiators here for the Carbon America capture technology is we've engineered all of those high global warming potential refrigerants out of the system. And I
Right.
think that's a key thing to watch with some of the other cryogenics is the global warming footprint of some of those refrigerants. And we've been really pleased that we've developed some strategies to avoid all those refrigerants.
This is originating from a question that has surfaced on our deck of participants. This modularity, is this something that could go on top of an office building that has boilers, for example, to heat and operate the building? Is it that kind of size?
I don't know that we would ever probably be down at that small a scale. I think our
Okay.
initial commercial module, we
Right.
anticipate doing about 100,000 tons a year at say coal-fired power plant concentrations. So at 12%, our initial module should do about 100,000 tons a year. If it were a gas plant, it would do kind of proportionally less based on that concentration. But we're also working on some other strategies to kind of improve the rates at those lower concentrations as well.
Right. Right. And
Yeah.
by the way, Alex, as you're listening in, what I've done is I've gone through our Q&As showing up and incorporating into the body of what we've been talking about anyway, so that we're probably pretty thin on Q&A towards the end, but we'll still want to do that.
And I think the other key point that I want to help people think about a little bit is when we tried to roll out CCS the first time in the
Right.
2000s, it was when we were going to have cap and trade.
Yep.
So we were going to have market balancing in our carbon pricing.
Yep.
And thus, when, for example, stakeholder costs go up, we would have an ability to absorb those costs. I think however, we're trying to use a lot of those similar type frameworks under a tax credit system, under a tax credit regime. And I think we've got to have people really thinking about and internalizing that and understanding the dynamics of how CCS works compared to, for example, oil and gas. For example, because people are more used to the idea of you pump something out of the ground and it's got intrinsic value there kind of at the land. In carbon capture and sequestration, if there's any value there, it's whatever is residual from that $85 tax credit. You have to take out your capture, your transport, and your sequestration. And if I've only got $85, how much margin do I actually have down there? And also pointing out that, right, when we actually got the tax credit raised from 50 to 85, that didn't result in an extra $35 a ton of margin.
Right. Right.
Basically, that helped account for some COVID inflation, and it helped account for some increasing stakeholder costs. Some of those original marginal abatement cost curves for the United States, for example, from the National Petroleum Council study on CCS,
Right.
$1 a ton was the kind of the stakeholder injection fee, right? We now see at least 7 times that in the Gulf Coast. And we are also seeing where some landowners are being offered 45 times more than others,
Right.
simply because of the merits of that particular project, or because people are doing projects at a loss and doing land deals at a loss to capture market.
Right.
Unfortunately, what's happening is it's led to these false impressions of the profitability of CCS. And it's led to this kind of rent-seeking behavior that we're seeing from stakeholders that is part of the opposition dynamics, right? Part of it is when you sign up all the easy people first, and then you start having to pay more and more for the holdouts, and then that irritates the first people that signed up. And you think about it, right? All of the incentive is given to the developers, to industry, and we're supposed to share it with them. They're motivated to work against us to extract as much as possible, right? And so we're seeing more and more of that 45Q tax credit literally buying out stakeholders. What we would really love to see, what I think is absolutely necessary to make sure that our inflection point in CCS gets us on a positive trajectory, instead of, I'm very concerned about the negative trajectory that we're on with this increasing stakeholder opposition. A lot of that comes down to the fact that our compensation strategies for stakeholders are a mismatch for the economic drivers of CCS. And so at Carbon America and with Mike here, we've been working with a number of other thought leaders within this space in order to do some real brainstorming around stakeholder policy in CCS. And it's not just about stakeholder engagement, best practices, and responsible carbon management principles. We've got to provide a direct incentive to our communities to work with us.
Right.
And so I think, as you know, everyone who's listening here, that we'd love to entertain those conversations, because you think about it as right now we're doing it like oil and gas, which is a challenge because we don't have market balancing. So we're eroding the value of 45Q. The other end of the spectrum, right? In Canada and the UK, the government owns the pore space. That's not going to happen in America, right? But there is a whole world of solution space to explore here. And so that's why we're always looking for like-minded folks that are willing to kind of shake off the what we've been thinking about CCS for forever, and do some really creative, original brainstorming. I think the scale of the carbon capture, the scale of the climate challenge is unprecedented. The scale of what we're trying to do in CCS is unprecedented. So let's not just kind of accept the existing stakeholder frameworks. Let's make sure that we're thinking about the policies we need for our stakeholders as well, to make sure that they are sufficiently, fairly, and equitably compensated. And I think, especially from an equity perspective, right, when we're starting to see different landowners being offered such very, very, very different strategies and different compensation levels, I think that's setting up a trajectory for more opposition in this space. And so that's what we'd love to kind of have the industry take a pause and think about this from a policy perspective as well.
Well, you bring up some very interesting points with that. As family landowners in Kansas, we've been through the oil and gas phases there. We've been there for a long time. And what's going on right now is we're sitting on top of the Nemaha Ridge, which has got some known hydrogen production now. There's been a rethink of how you look and source naturally occurring hydrogen. The original set of eyes were always based on oil and gas, and now they are coming at it from how does hydrogen even exist? But that also brings something else. There's been a couple of wells drilled in our area, in the counties we're at, and land we're on, and now we've got 3 different groups beginning to bid land up. And the leases that they're given to the landowners are from like 1985. And what they're banking on is that there's a very lightly educated market space to read these and then go from there, rather than, maybe enlightening the landowners a little bit better. Make a long story short, that's always been kind of the traditional way. The other part too is that the rules and regulations, the laws in all the states are all different. around, the ownership of, the transfer of ownership of, the rights and obligations and commitments required, and that with land rights, subsurface rights. And so there's probably some work. I'm not an attorney, and so I'll stop at that point. But I bet there's a lot of work for some innovative attorneys to figure out ways to do this in an equitable way. Try something new and different. Just like the hydrogen guys on the natural hydrogen side are now suddenly having to rethink the geology that they would expect to find hydrogen in the first place. And that's kind of the hydrogen's off topic. The last piece is there's, again, we said earlier before we started, I'm a believer in all the above. And when somebody asks, well, how about the renewables and CCS? How do they work together? And these things all require land. They all require markets. They all require permitting. They all require a lot of interaction with all the stakeholders, not just one particular group of stakeholders, land being included in there. And so my guess is that renewable guys and CCS guys and storage guys and all that will be in the same meetings a lot of times now going forward with the same stakeholders. So they probably need to align messaging a lot differently than they've done it in the past.
Mhm.
So is there, we're down to 4 minutes left. Let's see if there's been a couple other questions that have popped up. So there's an interesting one that that's worth talking to. There's a person who questions the S in storage, for storage of CCS, and that they're not convinced that the geologic storage in certain areas might be up to the speed that it's been proposed as. And how do you mitigate that concern? Because that's going to be in a lot of locations, not this one particular person's concerns, but I've seen this elsewhere as well. How do you see that?
I think that's a very unfortunate reality of the CCS world, right? And I think, you think about the CO2 storage atlases that have been developed that show the kind of the blobs across the United States and the expected sequestration potential within those basins. Those are only accounting for a few of the technical considerations and
Right.
legal considerations for developing CCS. And I would posit that probably of those blobs that are on those big maps, realistically, maybe 5% of it is actually going to be kind of really viable, both technically and from a rights perspective. I mean, for example, pore space rights, anything east of the Mississippi is going to be an absolute nightmare and a mess. And so I think helping people understand from a much more practical way how challenging this really is going to be is I think an awakening that people are starting to have. And it's even interesting where, people in the regulatory space, in the policy space, might still have an impression that you can drop a pin anywhere in those blobs and you've got viable sequestration. There is so much more to it than that. And so I think a lot of people are probably going to end up with some surprises, that the projects that they thought were viable based on those few factors, when you account for everything else you have to think about, it's not going to be as viable as maybe people initially thought.
Certainly. So I would offer back that due to the great work at Department of Energy and their labs that have been working subsurface research for 20, 30 years for this area, but also other related subsurface research, that at least there's some tools and some trusted processes to map out some of this and understand it better. Like anything, there's always a sweet spot where all the best attributes are located. And like everything else, they typically are fewer than number than the broad, simple picture that's out there. People who have been in this space have picked that up. But that's again part of the stakeholder engagement. There's a certain amount of transparency that's going to be required with all this, if there's concerns, and how that works and how it's valued and who's controlling it and things of that nature. We're down to our last second. So I want to do this. Do you have anything you'd like to tell everybody? And also, this last slide gives you some points and also how to contact Ashleigh direct. And Ashley, I'm going to let you say any last point you would like to, and then I'll wrap us up.
I think please reach out. We'd love to have you folks reach out, whether you're looking at deploying CCS, whether you want to just talk shop about CCS. I'll talk all day, every day about CCS, especially people who want to collaborate on policy, and in particular, people that want to do some of this creative brainstorming with us around stakeholder policy solution finding. Please reach out, because we're kind of setting up an informal coalition to start getting some of that worked out. So please reach out, and we'd love to talk with you. And thank you, Mike, and to U.S. Energy Association for this opportunity to have this chat. Really enjoyed it.
Ashley, thank you very much as well, and great traveling through life with you. And we'll bring you back for more as this progresses. With that, I want to thank everybody that took the time to be with us today. And Alex and Irene, thank you for making sure this ran. It went great. And with that, everybody have a wonderful day.
Thank you.